Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Respecting the Beer. My name is Gary Arndt. With me is the man who's going to have a huge insurance thing that you're going to have to pay out soon. I don't know if you saw the damage downstairs. I had your new cider and the Kool-Aid guy smashed through the wall, so you're going to have to fix it. Mr. Bobby Fleshman.
Cheers.
And we've been waiting for this episode for a while because I have often mentioned that the difference between a brewery and a winery is that wineries are often attached to a vineyard, and they're often associated with agriculture. And brewers, for the most part, don't grow their own stuff. But our guests today are the ones that are the exception to that rule, and that's what makes them such an interesting story. Darin and Matt Riggs from the Riggs Beer Company outside of Champaign, Illinois. Thanks for being on the show, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So why don't we start by giving the...
Hey, let's start by Riggs. It's a lethal weapon reference, and I think Riggs might know. I don't know Matt. I've never met Matt, but I went to school with Darin, and that's how we greeted each other every time we started a class. So there you go. Back.
I was going to mention you guys both went to Davis, right?
Yeah.
For beer school.
Yep, exactly.
Class of 2013.
That's right, man. Like, what was that, last year? Or anyway.
It's been
on. How many kids later in decades? Yeah. All right, so back to the business.
Yeah, why don't you guys start out with the elevator pitch version of what you do and what makes your brewing company so different?
Matt, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So, there's 10,000 breweries in the country, and that's pretty cool, first off, right? We should all probably just take a minute and think how much has changed in the last couple of decades to make that the reality that there is now. But, the fact of the matter is a lot of them are pretty darn similar and are making similar stuff and going after similar trends. And what Darin and I had, the idea that we formed long ago was really rooted in agriculture and our family's history on the farm. And happy to be able to say that maybe 20, 25 years after having that original idea, we're doing it. And it's thrilling, and it's actually every bit as rewarding as what we hoped it would be back when it was a dream. But yeah, we vertically integrate grain that we grow on our farm, thereby capturing all of the added value rather than having other, processors and middlemen, usually publicly traded corporations, capture that value. We're able to retain that value from the grain all the way to the consumer. Except, obviously when we go through the wholesale channel, we share that with our distributors and our retail partners who serve the beer. But still, when you compare that to growing corn and then selling that corn, and then they later process that into high fructose corn syrup and then Mountain Dew, we get way more share of the profit than it was when we were growing Mountain Dew on the farm.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Matt said just more rewarding, but also more challenging than what we originally thought when we first, had the idea of drinking beer back in college, back in the day, right? So it's been a journey, and we're still figuring out how to do this in Central Illinois.
Yeah, I see us covering three topics: the sustainability part of your business, the fact that you're developing your own crops, and that you do grow and are involved in the malting of your own crops. I want to say F you guys for making the rest of us look so bad. You do all of this, and you all also defend our country. I think you guys are still serving or do periodically serve, right? In both which branches are you of the military you guys involved with?
So that's a bit in the rearview mirror.
Okay.
We were both on active duty after college. That's how we paid to go to get our bachelor's degrees was ROTC. I was in the Navy for 10 years on active duty. Got out. I stayed a reservist for the next 10 and just retired about a year and a half ago from the reserve side of things, which is a little bit different than the active duty side. But Matt, he was on the Marine Corps side of things and did his stint, paid back for school, and then decided not to keep up with that anymore. So now we're both proudly in the veteran category.
Well, I just wanted to lay that base, that framework, so that everyone understands how much we're playing catch up with you guys. Thanks for everything you've done for the country, what you've done for the industry. I'm a big fan of the classic styles, and you guys have taken it to 11. But I don't mean to keep hijacking the narrative here, but you guys are pretty impressive out there.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks. And Matt was saying with the 10,000 breweries in the country, you got to set yourself apart. So we just tried to check as many of those boxes as possible.
Yeah.
I think your story is great, but growing up in the Midwest and driving around, you drive past farms and you see a whole bunch of farmers that basically grow one crop. They sell it as a commodity, whatever the price might be, and that's their business. And it could be good or bad, depending on whether prices are up or down. The logic of what you're doing makes a lot of sense, but when you made the decision, it must have been kind of risky, or at least really kind of out of the ordinary. Was it kind of challenging? Were people wondering, like, are you guys crazy?
Let me jump in on, I'll answer this one. I think, honestly, not doing something bold and different would be crazy. We're a small family farm, and, the writing is on the wall that we would either have to consolidate, scale, get heavily leveraged with a bunch of debt to buy more land, bigger machinery, all that kind of stuff, to chase, these tiny margins in some years and negative margins in others. Like the beer industry is going through a bit of a readjustment right now. We grew up in a family farm that's survived 150 years in a row with massive economic and market adjustments every decade. So this is nothing new to us. A little bit of a harder time in brewing is like, okay, finally, it's not just like easy and 10 times the amount of operators can come, and enter the market and nobody fails. What we were seeing was in our original family business, the family farm, operators were failing every decade, a large percentage. That's due to the really tight margins that farmers operate when they're only selling beer on the commodity market. So really, the opposite is how I felt. The only thing that was risky is if we kept trying to compete at a race to the bottom on producing the cheapest possible corn and soybeans to largely be sold to the export market at a subsidy with government subsidies. That seemed risky to me. What seemed not risky at all was, how do we add value to this? So yeah, people thought we were kind of crazy, but I kind of think people are crazy if they continue thinking that just making larger and larger farms to grow corn and soybeans is going to be profitable. I think that's insane.
I mean, I guess when you think about it, the cost of the brewing equipment versus the cost of a new combine or something, not radically different. I mean, they're both super big purchases, but at least with this, it's, something you're using on a regular basis. And like I said, you get higher margins.
So why not do both, right? I have a combine and the brew
Just
house.
out of curiosity, how big is the farm in terms of like number of acres?
So we're at 300 acres, give or take, a couple. And it was the typical Central Illinois corn and soybean 50-50 rotation before we started growing our brewing grains.
And is everything you produce going into brewing operations?
No, not even half right now. So depending on the year and the rotation and the field and what we're doing, we're devoting about 30 to 40 acres of that to the various brewing grains. So wheat, barley, and some specialty corn that we grow for the beer. Matt, what's the most recent update? And that gets us to about 40% of our raw material inputs on the brewery side.
Yeah, exactly. So we should be real upfront and clear. So the beer I'm drinking right now is our American lager. That's majority, over 50% our grain. Our Hefeweizen is our number one seller. That's also over 50%. Our current seasonal is our Kolsch. That's 100% our own grain. But next month is Maibach. To make a German-style Maibach taste like it would in Germany, Illinois barley is going to mess with that a little bit. So we purposefully don't try to substitute, all of our commercially sourced grain out with our own stuff. It's definitely for our year-round flagship beers. It's the majority of our of our grain in those beers, but an Oktoberfest with Illinois barley, it's not gonna be additive. It's gonna be subtractive to the quality of the beer. And kind of our rule is if it doesn't make the beer, either the same or better, then we're not going to use it. So we could say that, hey, we're going to try to be 100% our own grain, but I think that it's way too competitive of a marketplace out there to be doing that. If we're going to make 3,000 or so barrels a year, which is kind of what our facility's set up to do and really needs to operate at, doing that with only Illinois grown barley is going to be pretty difficult. We still need to make an Oktoberfest that tastes like it does in Germany. And you can only do that, or at least at this point in time, I'm convinced that you can only do that with imported German barley malt. Maybe we're 20 years away, maybe we're 10 years away, maybe we're a million years away from being able to make that type of beer style with Illinois grown barley. I think we might be the first ones to be able to figure that out because we're working on it. But I can tell you in all honesty that we cannot, on the wheat beer, we can absolutely get away with it. There's enough of a fermentation profile on that beer that we can kind of cover up the origin of the grain with fermentation profile, and it tastes just like it would in southern Germany. But on the lager side, on the cleaner, more neutral ferment side, the grain shines through. And our goal's never really been to be 100% our own grain. It's been to make really freaking awesome beers. And where it makes a lot of sense and makes the beer even cooler, use our own grain.
Another thing to add with that is a lot of people think, oh, hey, you're growing it yourself. You're saving on that bill to the maltster. And that actually isn't the case because of the small scale that we're both growing, malting grain and getting it malted. It's actually more expensive to use our own grain than it is to buy bulk two-row from, Malt Europe or what have you. So the economic argument isn't the reason for switching over, really.
What's the problem with Illinois barley?
How much time do you have?
Bridle or just the terrain and the weather?
Yeah, the soil's too dense. It rains too much. It's too humid in the summer. It's a corn jungle with a bunch of aflatoxin and vomitoxin floating around in the air. Barley is a really low input crop. When we first started ordering our barley varieties to see what would work here, talking to seed dealers, and they're like, well, are you going to use do you need a irrigated variety or a non-irrigated variety? And first we're like, well, we don't have any irrigation, so probably a non-irrigated. Oh, wait a second, it rains here, so yeah, we probably actually need to use an irrigated variety because what they're talking about is how much rainfall are you going to get, or how much water is the barley going to get, and we get a lot more here. So there's fungal pressure from that side of things, and then the winters here we're kind of in a whatever the opposite of a Goldilocks zone would be, in that we get really cold winters, but further north, when it's really cold, you've got snow cover on the ground protecting some of that winter barley. Even further north, they may just plant spring barley instead of trying to plant winter varieties like we're doing. But for the agronomics of everything, it made the most sense for us to find a winter variety that would work. We've had a couple crops that have just had complete winter kill from low temperatures and no snow cover. So it's every year we're changing something from the planting date to the variety that we're planting to what field we're using, how much nitrogen fertilizer we're using on the barley.
What crop was in before that crop? Because you can't just kind of plant in a vacuum. You got to realize what was there the year prior. That's going to impact from a fungal pressure as well as from a nitrogen standpoint. So yeah, barley's just it's the calculus of small grains, where wheat and corn way easier for us to grow. Barley's kind of been the it's very fragile. It's a fragile prima donna. It knows that it's perfectly made to make delicious beer, and that we have to provide it with a perfect environment to grow. Where wheat and corn, they're like, I don't know, they're just much more forgiving.
Well, and part of that is there's no other growers around here. None of the university extension doesn't have any data on best practices for growing barley in Central Illinois. Oh, and every variety that's been bred has been bred to grow somewhere else. There's literally a European seed company, small grains research facility in Champaign, Illinois. And you say, well, there's this small grains research facility, testing European barley and wheat varieties in Champaign. Then there must be more data. No, they bring them here because this is the torture test. This is when they are testing out new varieties for European malting barley. They bring it to Champaign, Illinois, to see, how much is it going to get attacked by Don.
This is the ultimate disease resistance package test here.
So you're talking about how you're hoping in a couple of decades, maybe these varieties will end up in a barley or a malt that can taste more European. You guys are not, you're not waiting for the industry to come to you, though. You're part of this. So you're helping decide what are these variables, what are these varieties, how do you dovetail what you have at your disposal. How do you marry that in such a way that you produce a product that gives you the same results as you would find with European products? What are you guys finding that's dominating the outcome, the flavor profile of the finished product right now? Is it weather? Is it origin of is it the species or the breed, or what is it?
I'll hop on this one. Yeah, I think that it's definitely the varieties that European breeders and then therefore growers and therefore brewers are using in Europe. But then also what we're seeing here in North America, the northern North American growing regions, mostly up into Canada, but also a little bit into Montana, Idaho. What we're seeing is that those varieties lack a disease resistance that they need in order to be grown here well, and have fungal levels that are below the levels that we need in order to use it in a human food product. It's quite frankly a safety issue. And when those varieties get attacked by fungus at those high levels, that trickles into the yield part of the equation as well, because now you've been stressing the plant considerably, so it's not able to produce as much yield, and it's too diseased to use. So yeah, I mean, the modern malt barley varieties that exist on the palette to choose from, we can't really pick from that palette because they just all lack the disease resistance, but they don't need the disease resistance where they're grown. So, it's hard to fault the breeders. We found success in turning back the clock. We have been pretty clear about our love for 6-row barley here. Not only is 6-row barley historically, the original American, it's what made American lager beer unique, was we used 6-row. And we've kind of abandoned that as a nation. But here at Riggs, we still grow a lot of 6-row because it's demonstrated a better both winter kill resistance and disease resistance package than what the modern malt varieties give to us. But that 6-row barley is kind of custom. It comes with its own baggage, right? It comes with usually a little bit higher protein, a little bit more aggressive flavor because it's a smaller kernel. And when you take the ratio of starch to other in that grain, in a 6-row barley kernel, it's going to be less starch and more other as compared to 2-row. And so you're going to get more grain flavor in the beer. So, that's the beautiful thing about an American double mash and American lager is when you take that little bit higher grain flavor, a little bit higher protein, and you kind of blend it out with either rice or what we, our preferred, as an Illinois farm family, our preferred crops, corn. If you take those averages of protein and you go to an 80-20 blend of corn, which has low protein, it's pretty cool how those numbers line up pretty much to give you like a European 2-row type of overall protein, like a blended protein average in the total grain bill. So it's kind of neat how we can look back in time and see that this happened for a reason. Maybe they didn't have like Keldol nitrogen analysis in the 1800s when they were figuring this stuff out, but it was just empirical. Like, hey, we're going to blend this out with some adjunct. They didn't know that it worked because there was a lower protein content in the corn, but now we do. And so why not keep using this little kind of like agricultural hack that allows us to grow, more robust healthy barley in a richer soil, a wetter, warmer climate than barley, two-row barley likes to grow in. All you got to do is kind of blend it with a little bit of corn, and you can come up with a beer that's got a unique flavor. I think it definitely does taste a little bit different than a modern American lager, which I would argue is not an American lager. A modern American lager is almost just like a very neutral international lager now. I would argue that our American lager is probably what an American lager used to taste like, and in our humble opinion, that's probably what it should taste like.
Well, if you just look at, at the time, 100 years ago, where people were growing barley closer to the brewery, they were growing mostly 6-row. And so the genetics for 6-row is a little bit more robust for being grown in various parts of the United States. And then if you look at the modern 2-row varieties, that all of the breeding effort in the past 30 or 40 years has been on 2-row barley varieties, and improving them and getting the enzyme package where the macro brewers would be able to use 2-row instead of 6-row. There's a good MBAA 2-part episode on that podcast as well that I would recommend if people want to hear the history on that. But basically, they've been training 2-row barley to grow in what are the typical commercial growing areas, and so it's just not. There's been no effort to make modern barley varieties that will grow, south of North Dakota.
There are some exceptions. So we've experimented a little bit. Virginia Tech, Nick San Antonio down there released a variety about 3 years ago called Avalon, which it's a 2-row variety, but one of the parents is actually thoroughbred, which is the only 6-row barley on the AMBA list that we have quite a bit of years of experience of growing. You would have to ask him exactly how you breed with one parent 6-row and one 2-row, and then the child ends up as 2-row. He could answer that. I can't. But, that's been a 2-row variety that we've actually seen success with. So there is a little bit of work being done on the periphery, but all the modern racehorse barleys, like, the seed companies get excited about and can make a lot of money off of breeding, all that work is being done to grow these barleys in conditions that do not exist in the Midwest.
So you guys have been involved. I think your light lager is a perfect point to have a conversation around, because you're talking about 6-row and corn simultaneously, and you guys are working. You mentioned a little bit here how you've been working to evolve and to advance the science around that. You have been doing some stuff with universities, test trialing some varieties of corn. I know with low oil content. I know a little bit. I know enough just to ask the question. But
so yeah. on the small grain side, yes, we work with the University of Illinois, which also it developed the wheat variety that we grow. And that was all done basically before we started up, and that was ready to pull off the shelf when we opened the brewery back in 2015. But since then, they've got a new small grains breeder, and she's branching out a little bit into, at our request or recommendation, into getting some barley germplasm to grow on the test plots down here at the university. And then we've got basically a demonstration plot in our beer garden where they come out and plant several varieties of barley, wheat, a little bit of rye. I think we got some Kernza out there doing its thing. And then in the late spring, they hold a field day out here, invite a bunch of people from all over the place, to come out and see what they're doing with the University of Illinois Small Grains program.
Yeah, and then to follow up on the corn, that's a whole nother probably podcast. To be honest.
Well, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, yeah. So on the barley side, I'd say stay tuned. This year what we're learning is keep experimenting, keep trying, build more data. Barley's the hard one. It's a long road to progress here, but we've made enough inroads. I mean, what have we used? I don't know, probably 80 or 90 tons of our own barley in our beer since we started. So nothing to scoff at, but it's definitely not to the point where I feel like we've cracked the code and I've got the Midwestern, playbook of how to grow malting barley. I think we're still a ways off. But on the corn piece, it is an interesting story. De-germed corn is what one really large American-based brewer is using for their corn adjunct lager products. Other
Busch
really
Light.
big, yeah, Bush, sure. They probably wouldn't mind the shout out. Busch Light, it's a fine beverage. Then you've got a whole bunch of other American brewers that are using dextrose, so processed corn sugar that can be either added hot or cold side. People are doing both. What we wanted to do was kind of turn back the clock and make a classic American lager using whole kernel corn. So not degermed. Degerming is a process where, the germ, which holds the kind of genetic data of the seed along with the majority of the oil, is mechanically separated from the starchy portion. And then the starchy portion, referred to as grits, is then used in the brewing process to keep overall oil low. We wanted to kind of turn back the clock to before that practice came to being. In the first couple of years of the brewery, we were just using our normal field corn, which had a fairly high oil content. And, I think it worked pretty well in the very beginning when we had very little distribution. Everything was draft only. Kegs were turning over very quickly. But we did notice that, the shelf life of that beer that had the corn in it was shorter than the other beers. And that made a lot of sense, that the oil was reacting with oxygen, going rancid, which sounds really terrible, but really what you end up with is kind of a tortilla and cardboard kind of typical staling flavor. So we thought, hey, what can we do to lower the oil content? We could either degerm, which will do it mechanically, but on a whim, one day I just kind of Googled low oil corn, and the search result, the number one result, was from an old professor of mine here in the city of Urbana at the University of Illinois. They'd been developing, and just through natural selection, selecting for the lowest oil corn variety on the planet. And we were like, holy cow, we need to get our hands on some of that corn. So long story short, we started that process probably 7 or 8 years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And pretty quickly we're blown away by the results, impressed. The oil content of the corn that we use is half of that of normal corn, which gets it about to the level of wheat malt, somewhere in the 2.5% oil content. A little bit higher than barley malt, a little bit higher than rice, but definitely way down below the 5% of normal corn, down to that 2.5%. Like I said, gets it to the point where we don't need to degerm it. It ages very nicely. I actually just did a tasting panel on a bunch of American lagers dating back to last August, and I didn't get any of that staling. And to do that without degerming the corn, when corn's 25% of the grain bill, I think that's a pretty cool little hack that has one foot in tradition of the old school original way of making American adjunct lager, but also one foot in modern understanding of knowing that reducing oil is worthwhile in beer. And our American lager is able to have one foot in both of those traditions, and it tastes pretty darn good too. So that's fun.
And your brew house has a cereal cooker, right? You're cooking your corn alongside, or maybe it's in your brew kettle. Maybe, I don't know how your setup is done, but am I correct in that?
We use our kettle as our adjunct mash cooker.
Gotcha.
And, or if we're making a German beer, that's our decoction vessel. So yeah, we got a 4-vessel brew house instead of the 5 vessels that I used to work with at Anheuser-Busch. Shout out to those guys. I spent a couple of years at one of their breweries. We're just double using the kettle as our second cooker, and then mixing them together in the main mash tun on the American lagers.
Gotcha. To be forward, would you guys be interested in collaboration, or at least sharing some of this corn? Because we make a light lager too, and I'm interested in playing with these ingredients. I'd love to be involved in this evolution of these products at some level. I mean, don't commit, but if you think about it, maybe we'll do it off air.
Yeah, we've not we've done a couple collaborations so far. I think Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we actually kind of a couple of years ago, we signed a licensing agreement with the university where we essentially help underwrite some of the research behind this corn variety and the ongoing labor associated with keeping these trials going. And we're actually kind of happy to sell the corn, and they tagged on a certain amount. I don't know if it's 5 or 10 cents a pound that goes back to the university for any type of outside sale. So, however many 1,000 barrels of this lager you guys want to produce, I'm sure the university would love that.
I wish we'd speak in thousands of barrels per. We run a 7-barrel system, and it's not gonna, unless it becomes the only thing we make. It won't be spoken of in the thousands.
Well, you never know.
You never know.
It's pretty good corn. Yeah, no, we're definitely open to it. And what we want to see, the American tradition of real American lager with corn and 6-row not disappear. We craft brewing for 20, 30 years. We've kind of like been a champion of rescuing these obscure European styles from extinction, and meanwhile we've relegated our own truly original, unique, beautiful beer style to irrelevance, and we don't want to see that happen. We want to claim back American lager that's actually made by American-owned breweries with American-grown grain of the varieties that were similar to what that they originated the style. So let's make American lager great again. Did I just say that out loud?
I think everyone that listens to this show and that's sitting in this room understands why you guys are on the podcast now, because you guys are speaking right to my heart for sure.
It seems like you guys have a whole area of stuff that most brewers don't have to worry about. That because you're growing the crops, do you guys have a division of labor between the two of you? Growing and brewing, or
we have to, right? But there's overlap. But generally, Matt lives up here at the brewery. We've got a building next door that we built an apartment on the top floor of, and that's where he and his wife live. And then I live down on the family farmhouse where I can look out my window and I can see how the fields are doing. So default statement maybe would be in the times of year that you need farming activity going on, which is coming up pretty soon here, I take the lead on that stuff. And then, but I work up here as necessary as well. And Matt comes down to the farm as necessary, which is pretty handy, because on the farm, it's mostly a lot of the year you're sitting around watching plants grow, and then it gets real busy in the spring and in the fall.
Without getting into numbers, has this been financially a good move on your part?
Yes.
As opposed to just straight farming?
Hell yes.
Hell yes.
It's not even close.
And that's going to wrap up part 1 of the conversation with the Riggs brothers. Tune in next week for part 2 and hear why the Riggs brothers actually think it's a good idea to grow your own grain to brew your beer with. The producer of Respecting the Beer is me, David Kelso. Be sure to join our Facebook group to connect with other beer lovers. And if you'd like to support the show, you can head on over to Patreon. For as little as $4 a month, you can support the show and get a 7-day free trial to hear the full conversation with the Riggs brothers right now. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, please remember to respect the beer.